This is Claudia Jones's statement. I'm going to actually show you the book that we're actually reading from first. We're actually reading from this compilation work here, which you can get at Iskra Books for free, by the way. Or you can buy yourself a copy if you prefer to read a physical copy. This is Internationalism in Practice. Claudia Jones, Black Liberation and the Bestial War on Korea. Featuring words from Claudia Jones, Gerald Horne, Denise Lin, Betsy Yoon, Tion Paris, and Kim Il-sung. And we are down here on page 116 on the PDF or page 106 on the physical copy. Statement before being sentenced to 1 year and a day imprisonment by Judge Edward J. Dimrock after a 9-month trial of 13 communist leaders at Foley Square, New York, February 2nd, 1953. By Comrade Claudia Jones. Your Honor, there are a few things I wish to say. For if what I say here serves even one whit to further dedicate growing millions of Americans to fight for peace and to repel the fascist drive on free speech and thought in our country, I shall consider my rising to speak worthwhile indeed. Quite candidly, Your Honor, I say these things not with any idea that what I will say will influence your sentence of me. For even with all the power your honor holds, how can you decide to mete out justice for the only act to which I proudly plead guilty? And one, moreover, which by your own prior rulings constitutes no crime. That of holding communist ideas, of being a member and officer of the Communist Party of the United States. Will you measure, for example, as worthy of 1 year's sentence my passionate adherence to the idea of fighting for full unequivocal equality for my people, the black people, which as a communist I believe can only be achieved allied to the cause of the working class? A year for another vital communist belief that the bestial war on Korea is an unjust war. Or my belief that peaceful coexistence of nations can be achieved and peace won if struggled for. Another year from my belief that only under socialism will exploitation of man by man be finally abolished, and the great human and industrial resources of the nation be harnessed for the well-being of the people. Still another year's sentence for my belief that the denial of the exercise of free speech and thought to communists only precedes, as history confirms, the denial of the exercise of these rights to all Americans, etc., Honorable Judge? Of course, Your Honor might choose still another path for sentence. You will no doubt choose as the basis for sentence the concocted lies which flowed so smoothly from the well-paid tongues of stool pigeons and informers who paraded before you here and gave so-called evidence which the court has asserted was amply justified. Amply justified, Your Honor? What has been amply justified? The lies of degenerate witnesses like Younglove, who can only be compared to Vanderlub of the Reichstag trials? The despicable forced admission of the black witness Cummings, who laughed at the thought of his $10,000 Jodas gold jingling in his pocket, when he said he would turn informer on his own mother for a mess of the prosecutor's pottage. We got an editor's note here. Thomas Aaron Younglove died 1977. He was an informant working for the FBI, who joined the CPUSA on their instructions. Merners van der Lubbe, 13th of January 1909, 10th of January 1934, was a Dutch communist building worker, who was tried, convicted, and executed by the government of Nazi Germany. He was accused of causing a fire at the Reichstag building, which many historians now claim was instead a false flag attack by the Nazi government aimed at discrediting the Communist Party. William Garfield Cummings was a black witness convinced to testify against Claudia Jones. And we got a little Sinchal note too here. Thank you. A mess of pottage is a famous idiom for something trivial, of little value, that is foolishly accepted in exchange for something immense, of lasting value. So I'm going to actually read this whole chapter, this paragraph for you again now that we've heard those footnotes. So, amply justified, Your Honor? What has been amply justified? The lies of degenerate witnesses like Younglove, who can only be compared to van der Lubbe in the Reichstag trials? The despicable forced admission of the black witness Cummings, who laughed at the thought of his 10,000 Judas gold jingling in his pocket when he said he would turn informer on his own mother for a mess of their persecutor's pottage. Footnotes, chat. Footnotes. And this is why also I will just take a moment here to say, that's why we don't really do e-readings on this channel, right? In fact, Iskra Books is working on e-readings. You can do e-readings anywhere. That's why I'm going to start doing a disclaimer before I start reading every time, I think. What I'm trying to do here is live readings, where if you hear something while I'm reading that you want to comment on or say, type it in chat. And, it might start a conversation about a particular thing that we're seeing or hearing, and might get us, into maybe a slightly, let's go into like a side rant a little bit, but it'll be something that helps inform us about this work that we're talking about. So never feel shy about interjecting or asking questions or whatever you hear that you want to comment on. These are live readings, not e-readings. Alright, just my little note there. The ill practice and unspeakable droning of the other black informer Roser, who blurted out his well-memorized script, and even, on Your Honor's prodding, would drift off into half-intelligible annotations. Quote, I don't know what you're talking about, to name but a few examples. Amply justified, indeed. This evidence. There was no official stamp powerful enough, Your Honor, to dignify the obscenity of this trial of ideas. Hence, for me to accept the verdict of guilty would only mean that I considered myself less than worthy of the dignity of truth, which I cherish as a communist and as a human being, and also unsuitable to the utter contempt with which I hold such sordid performances. That is why I find now, as throughout this trial of the ideas of Marxism-Leninism, that it is we, the defendants, who are morally free, and conversely, it is the prosecutors and the court itself that stands naked before the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the people of our country. It is this, Your Honor, that explains the not-so-strange reason that you yourself observed, that we feel no guilt. For true, though, that it is that the prosecutor has its framed-up verdict on a framed-up indictment and trial, it is not we communist defendants who tremble at this final stage of these trial court proceedings, but the very prosecutors of our ideas. Truly, the prosecution's victory sits shakily, for our ideas were confirmed in the course of this trial itself. It was the world-renowned Karl Marx, founder of the Marxist-Leninist science, for which application to American and world historical conditions we were so fearfully convicted, who long ago predicted that, quote, the time would come when the powers that be would no longer live by the very laws they themselves have fashioned, unquote. In the libraries and great institutions of learning, and yes, Your Honor, particularly in the homes of black and white workers, will not such reading, which will not stop with this or any other Smith Act trial, will not men, women, and youth think and ponder that such a time is here? The thinking process, as Your Honor well knows, is a process that defies jailing. When it is all boiled down, what shows is not the strength of the policies and practices of our prosecutors, which are akin to police state practices, but their desperate fear of the people. Nothing shows this more, Your Honor, than our exposure of the biased jury drawn from a system which virtually excludes blacks, Puerto Rican, and manual workers. This virtual exclusion exists not because of a lack of qualifications, or even financial hardship, but because of deliberate discrimination based on consciously cultivated white supremacist ruling class prejudice, which sullies our boasted Western culture. This conscious, white supremacist justice, which Mr. Perry so well pointed out, was shown in the gingerly handling by the persecutors and oftentimes the court of Achilles' heel of this alleged force and violence charge against us in relation to the black question. One of Jones's co-defendants, Pettus Perry, 1897 to 1965, joined the Communist Party in 1932 and was sentenced to 3 years in prison for violating the Smith Act. Introduce a title page to show Claudia Jones wrote an article during the indictment period, but you dare not read even a line of it, even to a biased jury, on which sat a lone black juror, there by mere accident, since he was an alternate well through most of the trial. You dare not, gentlemen of the prosecution, assert that black women can think and speak and write. Moreover, you dare not read it because the article not only refutes the assertion that the ruling class will ever grant equality to 15 million black Americans, but shows that what we are granted is unrequited force and violence. Not only in the unpunished barbaric crime of lynching, but in eating, in everyday existence, in living, in the armed forces, in jails, in the denial of land, in recreation, yes, even in the nation's cemeteries. The prosecution also canceled out the overt act which accompanied the original indictment of the defendant Jones entitled Women in the Struggle for Peace and Security. And why, Your Honor? It cannot be read, Your Honor. It urges American mothers, black women, and white to emulate the peace struggles of their anti-fascist sisters in Latin America, in the new European democracies, in the Soviet Union, in Asia and Africa, to end the bestial Korean War, to stop Operation Killer, to bring our boys home, to reject the militarist threat to embroil us in a war with China, so that our children should not suffer the fate of the Korean babies murdered by napalm bombs of B-29s, or the fate of Hiroshima. Is all this not further proof that what we were also tried for was our opposition to racist ideas, so integral a part of the desperate drive by the men of Wall Street to war and fascism? One thought pervaded me throughout this trial and pervades me still, and it is this. In the 9.5 months of this trial, millions of children have been born. I speak only of those who live. Will the future of those children, including those of our defendants and even Your Honor's grandchildren, be made more secure by the jailing of 13 men and women communists whose crime are not criminal acts but advocacy of ideas? Is this not a tyrannical violation of the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? It was in an American junior high school where I first learned of the great traditions of popular liberty of American history, for which I then received the Theodore Roosevelt Award for Good Citizenship. That I have learned to interpret that history and to work to influence its change for the betterment of the people with that indispensable weapon of Marxist-Leninist ideas. That is the real crime against me. Of all other charges, I am innocent. Hey comrades, welcome in. This is Claudia Jones giving her statement before being sentenced to a year and a day. In 1953. It was here on this soil, and not as Mr. Lane would depict to the court, as a young child of 8 years of age waving revolutionary slogans. And Mr. Lane here, Miles J. Lane, the prosecutor at Claudia Jones's case, had previously been characterized by her as the racketeer associate and prosecutor on the trial of Benjamin Davis, another black communist leader. Ben Davis was one of 11 targeted communists under the Smith Act, and was tried and convicted in 1948-49, with the others being Eugene Dennis, Gus Hall, Henry Winston, John Williamson, Robert Thompson, Gil Green, John Gates, Jack Satchel, Carl Winter, and Irving Potash. In the Davis case, Miles Lane made a crass white supremacist inference that a black juror could not possibly be impartial, as recounted in Claudia Jones's pamphlet, Ben Davis, Fighter for Freedom, 1954. It was here on this soil, and not as Mr. Lane would depict to the court as a young child of 8 years of age waving revolutionary slogans, that I have been experiences which are shared by millions of native-born black people. The bitter indignity and humiliation of second-class citizenship. The special status which makes a mockery of our government's pratted claims of a free America in a free world for 15 million black Americans. Transvox Girl says, this Smith Act, or the Alien Registration Act of 1940, is a United States federal law that made it a criminal offense to advocate the violent overthrow of the U.S. government or to organize or belong to any group dedicated to such advocacy. Yeah, in case you aren't aware what the Smith Act is. Yes, which is why we tell people not to Fed post in here. Because many of our viewers are...
Drugs! Huh? I choose drugs! Drugs!
Thank you, Meg, for the 420 redemption. Yeah, so that's why we exercise strict Fed posting around here. It was out of my Jim Crow experiences as a young black woman, experiences likewise born of working class poverty, that led me in my search of why these things had to be, that led me to the Young Communist League, and to choose at the age of 18 the philosophy of my life, the science of Marxism-Leninism. That philosophy that not only rejects racist ideas, but is the antithesis of them. In this courtroom, there has often flashed before me the dozens of meetings with black and white workers in the great auto plants at the Rouge, of New England textile workers, of students, and of women active in the peace struggle, which I have addressed on behalf of my party. Just as now, there flashes in my mind those young black women I have seen at the women's house of detention, almost children, of whom, but for many early discovery of Marxism-Leninism, I might have had to say now, there might I have been. Fuck's sakes. I hate when I press that button and now I'm like trying... Oh, thank God. For what crimes? Petty crimes born out of poverty, of the ghetto, of Jim Crow living. The crime of being born black on American soil. Of resisting treatment, rebellion against which unchanneled became lawless. Against the very Jim Crow society that perpetrates their lawlessness. This is a big reason I get upset when people fed jacket Kala. I disagree with her on a lot, but when you fed jacket, it doesn't actually bring up the problem, it just creates new one. Yeah, no, Kevcom, absolutely. One need only to be black in America to know that for the crime of being a black, we are daily convicted by a government which denies us elementary democratic rights. The right to vote, to hold office, to hold judgeships, to serve on juries. Rights forcibly denied in the South and also in the North. And I also want to concur with Mr. Perry's proposal that Mr. Lane, that he recommend to the Department of Justice that they show more zeal, since they have not ever persecuted a single anti-Semite or a Ku Kluxer in these United States, with its total of 5,000 lynched black men, women, and children since the 1860s. I am aware that these things are not to the liking of the persecution, or even of this court. But that cannot be helped. For one of the historical truths of all history is that the oppressed never revere their oppressors. Now I come to a close. The probation official who interrogated me was a black official. Your Honor undoubtedly has his reports before you. One of the questions that he asked me was, did I ever believe in any religion? I told him then that this was a personal, private matter, and was guaranteed under the First Amendment of the Constitution. I wonder now, Your Honor, if he somehow falsely reckoned, as many officials falsely reckon, that a change of belief or conviction in one's mature life is like putting on a new dress or a new hat. I could have quoted scripture to him. The scripture applied by a leading black religious figure in tribute and in observation of the Smith Act, jailing of one of outstanding sons of the black people, Ben Davis, now incarcerated in the Jim Crow Federal Penitentiary of Terre Haute, Indiana. The scripture runs, "Smite down the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." And this, Honorable Judge, is exactly what is the purpose of all Smith Act trials. This one in particular. I share the faith of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn and Pettis Perry and all my co-defendants that America's working people, black and white, will surely rise, not like sheep, but with vigilance towards their liberty, to assure that peace will win, and that the decadent Smith Act, which contravenes the Bill of Rights, will be swept from the scene of history. It was the great Frederick Douglass who had a price on his head, who said, "Without struggle, there is no progress." And echoing his words was the answer of the great abolitionist poet, James Russell Lowell. The limits of tyranny is prescribed by the measure of our resistance to it. If, out of this struggle, history assesses that I and my co-defendants have made some small contribution, I shall consider my role small indeed. The glorious exploits of anti-fascist heroes and heroines, honored today in all lands for their contribution to social progress, will, just like the role of our prosecutors, also be measured by the people of the United States in that coming day. I have concluded, Your Honor. Comrade Claudia Jones. Claudia Jones faced relentless persecution for her organizing and for her political activism. Arrested in 1948 and sentenced to 4 prison terms, she confronted threats of deportation to Trinidad. Despite, or most likely because of, her significant role in party activities for the CPUSA, Jones was found in violation of the McCarran Act, leading to her deportation order in 1950. Undeterred, she continued her activism in the United Kingdom, where, upon arrival in London in 1955, she joined the Communist Party of Great Britain, contributing to the expansion of the British African Caribbean community and leaving an enduring impact on the struggle for equality and justice.